Okay, the magic hour has arrived and we have confirmation of a quorum. So before I call to order, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Lekwitaq peoples. And we'll now call the meeting to order of the Electoral Area Services Committee for Wednesday, June 15th. Adoption of the public agenda.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any additions or anything? Okay. Moving on, petitions and delegations, we have none. Adoption of previous meeting minutes.
Move adoption.
Motion.
Second.
Any corrections, submissions, whatever? Hearing none. We'll call that adopted. And business arising from the minutes, anything? Seeing nothing, we have no public considerations, no chair's report, other than the fact that we could have a possibly long meeting today. I don't know. It's going to be a long day with this meeting and the others, and then public hearing tonight in Area D. So the first item under I, staff reports, number 1, ESA development permit for Mandula in Area D.
Move receipt of report.
Second.
Okay,
John will speak to this, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good morning, Dave. Okay, John, would you like to go ahead and state your piece?
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This application is for an environmentally sensitive areas development permit, which will enable a subdivision of a 4.54 hectare property into 2 lots. The proposal as permitted adheres to the density provisions regulated by the Campbell River Area Zoning Bylaw and complies with the development permit guidelines contained within the Oyster Bay Bottle Lake Official Community Plan. This application had been brought forward to the Area D Advisory Planning Commission, but due to illness, that meeting had been cancelled, and the area director had indicated that this proposal would be brought forward for consideration at this morning's East meeting without APC comment. Given this information and the board's limited discretion, it's recommended that the development permit be approved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, John. Any further comment? Director Lee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would just like to point out that on last Saturday in the pouring rain, the chair of my APC and myself and the whole APC was invited to do to go out and look at the site by the applicants. And John Aykroyd, the chair of my APC, and I did go out and tour the property so that I have a better idea of where the sensitive area is and where the swampland behind it, where it starts. It's very, very wet property, but the 2 applicants showed me where their houses would be built, and it's right out near the edge of the road. So it's away from the stream and away from the wetland as much as they can. And so I feel that I did my due diligence on it, and I'm prepared to move adoption of item B.
Okay, we're still on receipt. So on receipt, is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, go on to item B, which is that the committee recommend.
Move adoption
approval.
of B.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Is that a new hand, Brenda? Or
Oh, no, sorry, excuse me. Sorry. Take it down.
Okay. Anyone opposed to adoption? And then that passes. So we'll move on to item 2, which is the development variance permit for Lamb, once again in Area D.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay, on receipt, is there a staff comment on this,
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, John will speak to this as well.
Okay,
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. This variance application has been received to allow the proposed construction of a 186 square metre garage, which will be 7.53 metres in height and located in accordance with the setback requirements of the zoning bylaw. And the 25% height variance is being requested to allow the new garage to accommodate the storage of personal goods, including a motorhome. The adjoining residence at 4011 Deerfield Road is approximately 18.5 metres east of the proposed structure and separated from it by landscaping and shrubs, whereas the residence on the west side is much further away at 150 metres and also separated by trees and shrubs. And given the degree of distance to the neighbouring properties and the natural screening considerations, support can be found to grant the requested variance to allow the additional garage height of 1.53 metres. The application had been scheduled to be considered at the Area D APC meeting of June the 6th, but as happened with the previous application, illness prevented that meeting from occurring, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, John. So this is still on a receipt. Is there any further comment? Anyone
Yes.
opposed?
Uh,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask John if he'd received any feedback from any of the neighboring properties that might have been hand-built? Any comments from neighbors?
John?
Yes, there was one comment from Fortis who said that any construction would have to take account of the gas line that's running to the existing residence on the property, but there were no comments from private neighbours, Mr. Chairman.
And they were hand-built, eh? They were
Yes, they were.
notified?
Yes, they were circulated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on receipt. Anyone opposed? Carried. So we move on to B.
Move
That,
item B.
Second.
To be approved. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no hands. There's nobody opposed. That's passed. On to C.
Move C.
Corporate officer authorized.
Move
Seconder.
C.
Okay, moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? That's carried. Item 3, consultation process for Curry in Area C. Receipt of the report.
Move receipt.
Second.
Any comment from staff, Dave?
I think John will speak to this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much,
John,
Mr. Chairman. Third strike here. This application is for a 2.1 hectare parcel situated at 331 Edgware Road on Quadra Island, which is currently designated rural and zoned rural 1. And the proposal is to redesignate and rezone this parcel to allow it to be subdivided into 2 equal lots. One for each existing house and outbuilding group as shown on the sketch attached to the proposal. So this application is basically to request the board grant approval for the list of circulation to the First Nations. And once that is done and to the agencies, a further report will be brought back for the committee's consideration respecting the proposal based on the comments received. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, John. Just one question. I realize this is just the referral stage. And that's fine. Would this, after receipt of those comments, and that's period closes, will this then come back as a rezone
Yes,
and
it
a
will, Mr. Chairman.
redesignation?
Yes, yes.
So there'd be a full public process.
There'll be a public hearing as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. So on receipt of the report, anyone opposed? See none, it's carried. Item B, recommend that it be approved, the First Nations consultation.
Move B.
Move second.
Moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item C, committee recommend agency referral list.
Move C. Second.
Anyone opposed? Carried. That was an easy one. Okay, housing needs report, final draft, item number 4. The report from the CAO be received.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Dave, any comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe Meredith's going to speak to this, and we have our consultant online as well.
Okay, Meredith, you have the floor.
Thank you through to the chair. So this is to present the draft final housing needs reports for electoral areas A, B, C, and D. And as Dave mentioned, our consultant, Sandy McKay with McCullough Development Services, is on the call today to present the findings of this report. So I will go ahead and pass that to Sandy. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Meredith. Thank you, Chair, and hello, directors. Nice to see you all again. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get on with it because I know you've got a very busy day today. Oh, perfect. Someone's sharing their screen for me. Excellent. If you just want to make it full screen, that would be great, just so everyone can see. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. We can just skip right to the next slides. Perfect. So I'll briefly talk about the process. We'll go through some of the early findings and we'll have some time to answer any questions you've got as well at the end of the project. So we began earlier this year and continued throughout winter and spring of 2022. The study was extensive. It included a selection of key informant interviews, which I believe almost all of you participated in, as well as a community survey that garnered responses from 437 households, which is, to be frank, quite remarkable given the size and geographic spread of your regional district. We're very pleased with the response to the survey. We also gathered data from several key sources, some of which are mandated by new legislation. Others, we were able to go above and beyond those legislated pieces, including customized Indigenous housing data sets, as well as your staff approved an additional expense to collect information on short-term rentals that are proliferating throughout your region. And I'll talk more about that later. Next slide, please. I will briefly touch on limitations. There are many limitations when it comes to doing data-driven studies in rural areas. We're also limited by the requirements of provincial legislation. There are very specific requirements for data collection, including indicators that may not be perfectly relevant for rural areas. And as well, not all 2021 census data is available yet. Most of the key housing data will come in sort of October or November of this year. However, everyone else who's done their housing needs report only has 2016 data. So you at least have some up-to-date data within your report. And electoral areas have a challenge. Oh, sorry, can you go back to the last slide? Thank you. And electoral areas have a small, challenging data environment in general. You've got small geographies, you've got seasonal populations, especially in electoral areas B and C. And that means that rapid changes are not often quantified appropriately. But that quantitative data isn't everything. Along with that tremendous engagement response, we were able to combine geographies into rural and regional indicators, which can stabilize some of the metrics. And everything that we do is passed through 3 sort of filters. The first is the quantitative data, the second is engagement feedback, and the third is the professional experience of our team and the team at your and your staff team, who were immensely helpful in this process. Next slide, please. So jumping into it, I'll start with some basic figures on population. Largely, you would be familiar with this. Area D is the largest and fastest growing electoral area. It's up 18% since the last census in 2016. Area A is up 9%, B is up 8%, and C is up 8%. The more important thing, other than growth, which is definitely occurring, is where in the demographic spectrum that growth is happening. We expect the proportion of seniors to grow from 18% of your population in 2011 to as high as 35% of your population in 2031. And that has a tremendous impact on what type of housing is needed across your communities. And housing with supports for seniors is one of the most prominent concerns raised in community engagement. Next slide, please. Many older residents were worried about their ability to age in place, and some were currently supporting younger family members or were nervous that their children would not be able to find appropriate accommodations within the rural area that they grew up. So for us, that highlights the need for affordable and accessible housing, particularly rental options, as seniors on fixed incomes may not be able to afford an ownership position or maybe hoping to liquidate an ownership position in order to fund other aspects of their retirement. Home care and semi-supported or supported options were critical, so connections with Island Health and other health service providers, and housing closer to amenities and services as older residents are maybe not able to drive as frequently or navigate sort of the ferry system and things like that. The ways that you can move forward are some modest multi-unit housing. I appreciate that in electoral areas, multi-unit housing is not always the most appropriate solution, but where you can, thinking about modest density, as well as making regional land use decisions. And I just have highlighted a couple quotes here, including this one. This is a senior who told us that they'll likely need to downsize and there's no appropriate housing, such as a nice patio home available on Quadra, yet the need will increase as many of us aging seniors will want to stay on the island. And I think that was really reflective of many of the older people that we spoke to who wanted to remain in their community, but are looking 5 or 10 years ahead and thinking that they probably won't be able to stay in their current home, but aren't seeing any options for them. Next slide, please. I also want to touch a bit on renters. Rental housing is harder to find, more expensive, and more likely to be in poor condition than ownership tenure housing. Renters are also much less likely to be able to meet their housing needs than owners. That's a product of incomes, first and foremost. Renters earn about a little less than $40,000 as a median across your region, while owners earn closer to $65,000. It's also a product of limited rental availability. One of the even more so than cost and condition, availability was the first thing that renters brought up with us. There are very few rental units available across the Strathcona Regional District. About 18% of your households rent, which is for a rural area, higher than we see in many places. Often that number is below 10% in rural areas. About 45% of renter respondents who responded to our survey indicated their current housing needs were unaffordable. And if we look at the data, 41% of renters in the SRD rural areas are in core housing need, which means they're in either housing that's too small, too expensive, or in poor condition. And there are a couple of quotes here, I won't read them all, but this person just saying that they can't find a one-bedroom for under $1,400 a month. That's double what it was 10 years ago. Absolutely outrageous. Next slide, please. So again, similar to the supports for older residents, a need for more dedicated, affordable, and appropriate rental options as well. In certain places, it's critical to have housing for workers in key industries, as well as expanding the rental stock to include rentals that are appropriate for families as well as individuals. Again, you can encourage denser multifamily options. In some cases, you can consider rental zoning or pre-zoning, which is a new tool available to local governments that just came into pass in the last 3 or 4 years. You can consider things like inclusionary zoning or density bonusing schemes, but again, those are typically more relevant to municipalities, as well incentives to encourage affordable rentals. And one thing I will touch on is continuing to monitor and regulate short-term rentals across your region. Short-term rentals, things like VRBOs or Airbnbs are many residents were very concerned that they were directly impacting rental availability and affordability. The number of properties grew from 153 in 2016 to 625 earlier this year. Nearly 70% of those properties are in electoral areas, and the vast majority of them are entire homes or apartments. So they are not rooms within an existing home. They are individual housing units that we can't make a perfect one-to-one, but a number of them would be certainly converted to rental units if short-term rentals were more highly regulated. But again, that's a very difficult jump to make. Next slide, please. And it's not just renters, it's owners as well. And in these next 4 slides, I'm going to highlight each of your individual electoral areas. The green line represents the cost of the cost, or basically it represents the mortgage price that that household earning the median income as a first-time home buyer could afford to purchase on the market using some basic mortgage assumptions. Whereas the gold line represents the cost of the median home over the past 10 years. Both of these have been adjusted for inflation. And electoral area, what you can see, electoral area A, you can see that it's reasonably affordable still in electoral area A. It's the most affordable part of your regional district. And largely the lines align, and there's been some splits in the past 3 or 4 years where housing has gotten more expensive, but still relative to income, it has remained mostly affordable for most residents earning the median income. Next slide, please. And here's where we can really see the affordability challenges in your community. In electoral area B, it has rarely been affordable for a first-time homeowner earning the median income to achieve a mortgage that would allow them to purchase the median home. And in the last couple of years, especially in 2020, those prices have really skyrocketed. That's not unique to electoral area B. We've seen that across the province, and especially in the last couple of years. But that gap is just ever widening, making it more and more difficult for someone to get into an ownership position. Next slide, please. Electoral area C, very similar, though that gap is even more accentuated. You can see that the gap now is a little less than $400,000 between an ownership position and a rental position, and what someone earning the median income could reasonably afford. Next slide, please. And the last one, electoral area D, I think that this is maybe the most interesting one for a number of reasons. I think electoral area D has long been considered quite affordable, and I think it still remains certainly more affordable than some other areas. But the really interesting thing is the way the market has changed. The market largely priced units in electoral area D at around the price that people could afford for the first sort of from between 2011 and 2017, very closely mirrored. And you can really see that split that begins in 2016 and continues on till now, where the housing prices are going up and incomes are not increasing. And that 2016-2017 period is where a lot of these splits start happening across the province, and electoral area D is actually one of the most for me, it's one of the most instructive examples of how housing has increased in price and how incomes are not maintaining are not keeping pace. Next slide, please. So it's not just renters, it's not just owners, it's both. And as well, rates of insecurity are higher for single income households, lone parents, seniors, or elders, and young people. So I showed you graphs that represent the median income. Those types of families tend to earn much less than the median income. Owners, cost of maintenance, cost of utilities, worried they have to leave their communities. Renters, cost and availability, cost of construction is impacting all of these concerns. It's very, very difficult to build in rural areas, even more difficult to build affordable. And we heard a lot of comments about, land upgrades, procurement, utility costs, all of those things impacting your ability to expand your affordable stock in the electoral areas. Next slide, please. Which makes it really critical to continue to look at non-market housing. Non-market housing is typically housing that is affordable and secured in perpetuity, often funded through relationship with BC Housing and increased funding from senior government. Typically, it's operated by nonprofits. You have a couple of great nonprofits who are operating units within your region. For us, it's one of the only ways that we're going to be able to stabilize the market is to keep putting new investments into non-market housing. And unfortunately, that relies on external partners like senior governments, the province and the federal government. Some of the ways you can support those uses at a local government level are to educate your community residents to reduce stigma around these types of uses. Non-market housing and affordable housing is not necessarily supportive. It doesn't necessarily have supportive elements. More often than not, it is for families who simply are not able to afford market units. You can look at things like a land acquisition and disposal strategy, partnerships, and you can even explore formal collaborations like a regional housing service bylaw, of which there are great examples on either side of you in the Cowichan Valley and in the Comox Valley. And I think that's the last of it. We'll go to the last couple slides here. Perfect. I'll just acknowledge the elected officials, the 4 of you who participated in this study. We really appreciated your time and sitting down for interviews with us. And I would also like to acknowledge the tremendous staff you have at the USRD, especially Meredith and Elaine, who really helped us through this process and were really supportive and allowed us to reach so many people through the engagement process. And I believe that's it. I've got time for any questions you've got if anything comes up.
Okay, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. You managed to get it all in. Um, I have to say that, you know, it's an incredibly well-written report, and it basically tells us most of what we already knew anecdotally, but you've added the statistics. And I think that's a very important part for us to be able to deal with, you know, both locally and at other levels of government, other agencies, et cetera. There's a couple of points, if I could, real quick. The
Sure.
more emphasis on the impact of B and Bs, VRBs, et cetera, or BO or whatever. I think needs to be made because it's coming up daily. I just had 2 emails regarding, you know, our ferry cruise, et cetera, and they definitely dealt with the fact that we don't have any rental housing. And we don't have any rental housing because they've all gone to B&Bs. So, or not B&Bs, but Airbnb. So it's always played down by others, but it's not something that we can afford to play down. The emphasis on local government doing the work that needs to be done, much of that has already been done, and it's constantly stopped by senior government rules, hoops, regulation that will not allow us to proceed. And that we witnessed for over 2 years with our seniors housing, which would have fit into one of your categories, 16 units. And it took us 2 years to after giving them a complete presentation done by 2 architects and a whole consulting group and the entire island's involvement, we still came up short, according to BC Housing. So, you know, they just made it more and more difficult and more costly. So there's this lack of cooperation between those levels that are encouraging us to do all the work, but they're not helping us. And I think that the real example of that is if you just want a concrete example, look at the local area plan for Kwathiaski Cove. Took us 3 years to develop, 5 years to get it into place. It's in place. It completely allows for super densification for all of these housing needs that you speak of here. And it's already done. The OCP changes. All that people have to do is, you know, ask for which zone they want, but they get stopped by Island Health, Vancouver Island Health Authority, because of need for a water system. So that then puts it on our shoulders to come up with the money, come up with the approvals, and which basically means a hell of a lot more advocacy and lobbying to the provincial government to try and make these things happen. And they're in control, you know, so we've got the left hand not knowing what the right hand's trying to do properly. I think, you know, somehow, I don't know if there's any chance that this is the final report, but if there's a way of adding notes to it, please do. Because we're not getting the help we need from the province. Sorry to take up all that time. This is still on receipt. Noble, you're next.
Thank you. I don't think we should rush through this. We have a full agenda, but I think this is the most important thing on it. And if we don't get to some of the other things, so be it. This is critical. Thank you, Sandy, and your team for the work. I couldn't agree more with everything that Jim has just said. Just to reiterate a little bit here on Cortez, a similar situation. We raised over $1 million, bought 50 acres of land, you know, philanthropically created a society specifically to provide affordable housing and seniors housing, and have been struggling with BC Housing for years, who, you know, just doesn't have the funds to meet the need. And and even if we were to get those funds, it is so astronomically expensive to build to their standards per square foot. It's bordering on criminal. We just built 4 little units to their standards, and I understand they're wanting to build for longevity, but it's such an impediment that nothing ever happens. And if we do get the funding, then we lack the contractors, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, it's way, way, way too onerous. I will underline that here, not only is there a massive, massive rental housing crisis, but we don't have a place for our fire chief, our doctors, our ferry workers. Like, this isn't just the hippies in the woods. This is core, not to say they're not important. I was one too, and, turned into community service provider, but it's absolutely critical. And so what I would love to do, Sandy, is for you to bring up the page in your report that says, what we could actually do, and really have a frank conversation walking through those recommendations of what local government could actually do. I concur with Jim that largely a lot of this falls to the province, but shy of banging your head completely bloody, what couldn't we actually do? Because I'm quite frustrated with our own lack of ability to actually even do the things that you're recommending. And to be honest, I mean, I haven't read every detail of the report, and I certainly will dig into it more. But to be honest, looking at your recommendations was quite disheartening, because even though theoretically we can, I don't know in practice they're going to work. So if out of all of this gut-wrenching reality that you've demonstrated so beautifully, we can find a couple of places that the regional district could actually take action on, and maybe between yourself and Meredith, we could have a bit of a fulsome discussion here that could lead to the four of us actually supporting, one or two clear steps forward. I'd really appreciate that, because we're not funding long range planning. We're having a hard time updating those core documents. There's very little appetite in our communities for pre-zoning. There's literally no development pressure that's coming in a form that our communities are supporting.
Yeah.
It's the cost of development is so high. There's very little incentive. Most property owners are not interested in developing. They want less people and less commotion. So I'm just feeling quite despondent about the tools that are available.
Yeah, thanks, Director Edison. It's a really good point. One of the challenges we have in navigating this funding program is that UBCM has not provided funding for recommendations or action planning as part of this project. So what we've given you in terms of high-level recommendations is really skirting the edge of what we're able to basically bill for. That being said, a potential next step could be some sort of action plan, but I will work with Meredith. I have no problem doing that, to identify a few of the more critical and maybe low-hanging fruit or first steps that you can take. I feel like that would be a really appropriate place for us to go with this. Just knowing from experience, I think that some of the easier things to do would be looking at legislation that governs those short-term rentals and different ways of regulating or de-incentivizing them. There are many, many examples now across the province and across our country of local governments who have done exactly that, including many on the island. So there's lots of best practices to pull from, and you can pretty easily develop, I think, a policy solution or a policy intervention at the regional level. The other thing to look at would be, and I did mention it briefly, is the community housing service or affordable housing service bylaw. That's something that regional districts have that is unique, is the ability to actually levy a tax for a support service, and housing is one that has been done. It is a challenge to get it passed. Typically, it goes through referendum, as it did in the Cowichan Valley and the Comox Valley, but those have proven to be, I think, fairly successful, and they allow the regional district to actually directly fund housing initiatives. So that would be kind of where I would suggest looking into first, but obviously I will work with Meredith to identify a couple of things. And even if it's as simple as highlighting and some next steps, I think that would hopefully move you from despondency into at least giving you some direction, right?
So briefly, if I might, Mr. Chair, Sandy, thank you for that. So what I'm hearing is the regulation around vacation rentals, which we took a stab at having a conversation about when we were updating our zoning bylaw here that we didn't complete 4 to 6 years ago. And one idea that was on the table was, if you were going to do a short-term vacation rental on your property, you either had to reside in another dwelling on the property or provide a year-round rental on the property. I certainly supported that. but we didn't take a hard look into what the ramifications would be. And the response from public was very split along age lines. Those who had been here a long time or who were older or wealthier or more secure were not interested. And those sort of younger, more unstably housed were very supportive. But I think having somebody take a harder look at what the actual repercussions of an implementation of, a few different versions of that policy would be really useful. And then your other was, just to clarify, you're suggesting potentially a tax service, a regional tax service, or electoral area specific tax service that would then allow the local government to specifically build and fund and own and operate housing, or transfer those funds to a local nonprofit housing provider, or what are some of the best practices there? And then I guess my third question is, if there was will from this body to, through our planning service, fund sort of a next step of things, would you be engageable? And, it's not up to me who does contracts, but would it be possible to take this work and actually write a more fulsome, recommended action plan? And what would be the steps to do that?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with your comment at the beginning on short-term rentals. I think that is a very common split that we see all the time. And a lot of people, even who may be younger, but who maybe over leverage themselves to get into a home ownership position and now have to have a short-term rental on their property in order to maintain their mortgage payments, right? They are also folks who would be not as pleased to see some sort of legislation go in. But I think there are ways to mitigate that. And as I said, there are now lots and lots of great best practices to pull from for short-term rental policy. So I think I don't want to add more work to your staff's plate, but whether it's staff or an external consultant, there would be lots of ways to explore the ramifications of those potential practices. And it can be done on an electoral area by electoral area basis, or through OCPs, right? It doesn't have to be done regionally. You can tailor it to your situation. To your second point, the regional housing service bylaw, the way it has been done in the Comox Valley and the Cowichan Valley is that it is, yes, exactly, a tax levied. I think it's very minimal in terms of the overall property tax levy. And in the Comox Valley, it's the Coalition to End Homelessness that they put together a basically 5-year funding program, and allocations are made from the tax pot to that nonprofit based on their requests in the 5-year funding program. So yeah, it's done through a nonprofit, and it's done similarly but slightly different in the Cowichan Valley, where it's actually done through the Cowichan Valley Housing Association, and they make a similar allocation based on, I believe, a long-term strategic plan. And they do fund slightly different operations. One is more focused on homelessness and underhousing and housing insecurity. The other one is more focused on affordable housing and supporting some of those non-market initiatives. Neither collects enough money to directly fund full things, but what they do is they fund some of the critical pieces at the beginning. The early $20,000 that gets you a site assessment, the $25,000 that allows you to put together some preliminary renderings so that you can take those to BC Housing and make your application more interesting and feasible at that level, right? So that's kind of the way that they're doing that work. I think both are really good examples, and I think it would take some time, and you need to find something that works for you at the SRD level. But there are truly tremendous nonprofit assets that you have in your communities that have been working towards those goals. I was able to interact with a lot of them, and before you kind of jump on anything as elected reps, I would absolutely continue to do the work that you are doing already to connect with those actors and make sure that you're working collectively towards a common goal, because yeah, you've already got a lot of people doing great work across your communities. And the third thing, I mean, there are a ton of great consultants that you would be able to hire for an action plan. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of communities going out with similar documents. My recommendation would be to find one that you like and read through it a couple of times first, or find a couple that you like, and then maybe see who the consultants were that did those. Or, that way, at least, you've got some elements that you want to see move forward in your document, and that will give whatever consultant you do hire, whether it's us or someone else, the direction to make sure that you're getting what you want, because action plans can sometimes be not as action oriented, or you know, they just sometimes they aren't as useful as you would hope they would be, right? So I definitely recommend doing some research and seeing if you can find a couple of documents that you like before moving too far forward.
Just on that note,
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
thank you.
I just happened to read on Civic Info, the Southern Gulf Islands, the CRD had an action plan for housing, and happy to distribute that. But I'd echo what Sandy said. I quickly read it. I didn't go cover to cover, but there's not as much action in there as you would anticipate sometimes. Lots of plans and goals to work forward, but happy to distribute that because I think there's obviously some relevance to the islands here as they did Southern Gulf Islands, and I think there's likely a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that, Dave, that I think, Nova's comments, great comments, and the action that I think, we as an Electoral Area Services Committee could take is to, put forward some sort of motion, maybe crafted by you, Dave, to get us moving on, first of all, compiling the information, and second of all, actually doing something about this rental housing stock that doesn't exist. Whether it be done, whatever method we take to do it. But, the method that was given as an example by Nova in their zoning bylaw review, that's the kind of thing. I think Whistler did something similar where, if you want to build something of so many units, then you have to provide so many units to provide for your workers. Well, okay, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, whether they be in single family housing units or whatever, or duplexes or fourplexes or whatever. But it seems that at the planning level, the regional district could promote moving forward with that in each of the electoral areas or the ones that want to participate, because we certainly cannot avoid it any longer. We are sitting here with a two-ferry system waiting to fire up that cannot go into operation because we can't find rental housing for the crews. It's crazy. And our paramedics, our doctors, they come from Campbell River because they can't find a place to live here. So these kinds of things they're essential. They're not wannabe things. We have to have them. So if we have to have them, then it as a local government being the closest to the people, and they're telling us that's what we need, then I think we need to start moving towards that somehow, however we do it. I'm not suggesting that I know the answer to that, but we got to get going, guys.
So, Mr. Chair, on that note, happy to kind of, I see the conversation is leaning towards next steps here, and happy to circulate, or a director can think of a notice of motion for next meeting, or staff can kind of distribute what may be a motion that, based on the conversation we've had here, for the next EASC, if you want. I don't think thinking one right now is going to be too useful, but either one of the directors or staff, for sure, we can circulate what could be a potential motion to move forward on an action plan or next steps based on the report that we have in front of us.
I think that would be a wonderful idea, Dave, and I think it should come from staff having studied this thoroughly and working with the directors as to what their needs are. But the rental housing and the Airbnb issue, I think, are the two things that we need to really grapple with and get on with it, whether it's a rental housing only zone or something. Somehow we need to get on with that, and I think probably staff are best positioned to peruse the data that's already there. I believe UBCM has, excuse me, some compiled information on what's been done elsewhere. And maybe some of that information could all be brought together and staff could come up with, you know, the best of the best and put it forward to us and see what we think. But I think that should come from staff to the EASC, and then we move on. Brenda, you were next.
Well, I'm kind of a different opinion from the two islanders, outer islanders there. I think basically the market will provide what housing is available and at what cost, and it'll balance out eventually. Housing prices are starting to go down because I think there's no such thing as affordable housing. I think that it's whatever the market will dictate and can get away with. And at the Community Health Network meetings when they first started up, I recommended that, you know, rather than chasing down mortgages and trying to tax other people who are already in their homes and trying to meet their costs, tax them for providing somebody else with the luxury of living, you know, on a beautiful outer island and rent out parts of their homes, their basements, their carriage houses, their cabins in the back to other people. There is existing opportunities to live cheaply. Area D has lots of affordable units in the mobile home parks in the vacation rental segment when it's not full of people. It's always full of people that live there permanently, actually. And it's very affordable housing. Maybe that's why I'm not quite as, you know, concerned about the idea that people can't find affordable. And like when I saved for like years to buy for a down payment to buy my house and worked hard and, you know, got a small mortgage and managed to pay it off like 15 years ago. So I'm sitting here in this house that's 2 stories and I can't, you know, it's single family residential. You can't rent out any part of it, but you should be able to because there's lots of room. One of the negative aspects of affordable housing in Area D is the price of drinking water. If that was not such a burden for people, people are paying over $2,000 a year for drinking water, which is higher than most of our taxes. And for all of our other services, well, that makes it unaffordable for people to rent out a unit in their house because regional district will charge for every unit of water, every household using the water.
Yeah.
So I'm
There
just
has
saying that
to be.
there's lots of already built housing in Area D anyway that we could utilize if we looked at the zoning bylaw and modifying it somewhat to allow people to rent out part of their property. You don't have to go and BC Housing and buy, you know, a mortgage and rent it out. And I just think that the idea of social engineering our way from the local government level out of this current high level market is kind of unrealistic. And I wouldn't support any bylaw that recommended taxing current property owners to make homeless people better off. I mean, my son is 33, lives in Alberta. He just purchased his 5th home, an executive style homes that he is renting out. And he's got 5 mortgages and he's, you know, providing rental housing. But he has to live in Alberta to do that because, you know, it's not a luxury place to live. It's like -40 in the winter. It's like hard to live there. It's not pretty. It's not as pretty as where we live. But on the other hand, you know, you have to go where there's opportunity. You can't just sit on a beautiful, you know, island in the Pacific and think that all good things are going to come to you, because they don't. You have to go get them. That's how I feel about it. It's like
Okay,
you have
thank
to
you,
go
Brenda.
where the housing is possible.
Thank you for your comments. I think we've got to move on. I see Nova has posted something in the chat, and I would just like to ask if you would be willing to amend that slightly where you say after the hyphen that a draft bylaw be created for all electoral areas to regulate short-term vacation rentals and provide long-term rental options. I don't believe it goes that far, but I think that's sort of where it would be heading is to.
Yeah, I don't
for somebody
expect that
act-
these are going to get put on the table as is. I'm just trying to add thoughts as we go, mostly for discussion here, because I don't expect that even 3 of the 4 of us are going to agree on any course of action. So I'm trying to find, is there any common ground at all between the, 3 of the 4 of us, or ideally 4 of 4 of us? Or if not, what can individual rural areas do on their own? Because we have such different communities and such different views about what to do. And so I see Gerald has his hand up, and I don't want to monopolize, but I do want to ask again before we end this conversation if Sandy could put back up sort of those list of recommendations and we could talk through, what would actually be viable. But thanks, Chair.
Okay, I just in response, before I go to Gerald real quick, in response to Brenda, I certainly am not in favor of the taxation option either. I think that's just another bureaucratic way of making something not work. The regulatory ways are probably much more practical and probable. When you get into the cost of housing right now, $300 to $500 per square foot on Quadra Island. That's insane. That's absolutely insane to look at that kind of cost. So anyway, Gerald, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Area A is a very unique situation, especially in the Sayward Valley. We're not encumbered by any bylaws or zoning restrictions, so people can rent their houses or basements or attics or whatever they sweet please. So that isn't the problem. Our unique situation is that outside of the valley bottom, which is a flood zone, there's a very limited bit of side hill, and then it's all TFL, which is unavailable. Apart from that, everything else is agricultural land reserve, which greatly restricts what you can put on there. You can put one very small secondary cabin. And there is no opportunity for growth in the Sayward Valley because there's no available land. And that's just the way it is. Apartments, there's never been any in the valley, in Area A. And there's the odd Airbnb. But I don't see much common ground with what the other directors are having in their areas.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. Any further speakers on this? If not, we have, I would suggest that Nova's written words in the chat help inform Dave in his bringing back a report to us at the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, so
Anybody else?
just want to clarify, if Director Anderson, is that a notice of motion or just some text for discussion?
Yes.
No, it's just my attempt to throw ideas out while I didn't have the floor. What I'm trying to find is there any common ground at all between 3 or 4 of us to do anything? And I would love, while we have this time, all of us, to see if that's the case, because there's no point in sending staff away to do a bunch of follow-up reports if there's no way it's going to go anywhere. So I'm just trying to support a good conversation here at this moment. And maybe through Sandy's, if that page could be brought up with the recommendations, and we could go through and see, is there any appetite for any of us to bite on them? Otherwise, yeah, it's just a waste of staff time.
Well, I think then based on that, coming up from a motion for next meeting that we think there's some common ground amongst the directors that could pass, and if it does, then we move on from there. If not, we don't. So I would say be patient. Let's come up with a motion for next meeting, and let's see if there's some common ground, and if there is, we got something to move forward on.
Okay,
And
so
I would
that
like-
motion that speaking of, Dave, the motion you're speaking of would be crafted by you and brought to the committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we'll take the discussion we've had here today and, circulate it amongst the directors and see if there's something that, they want to add to it and bring it forward at the meeting for discussion and see if we can get something passed.
Okay, well, I think it's a great idea to do that, and that's my opinion. Brenda, you may have another.
Well, I would
Go
like
ahead.
us, we're not, the 4 electoral areas in Strathcona Regional District are not going to change the market. But what we could do is start with a focus on rental housing, and that might include vacation housing. But look at existing housing stock and see how we could have policies that would encourage people to be able to create some more units within their homes and on their properties, without having to build through the government. I just think that, there's a tendency for the ideologues to come up with, ideas that are not workable. It's a very interesting report, has really good information in it, but the solutions cannot be borne by the local government alone. And like Jim and Noba have said, it's up to, it's up to so many other agencies, and we're not going to wave a magic wand at built housing. At new market housing. I think we should focus on what is possible instead of what is very difficult, and we should look at the rental market first and see what's available for people, and see how we can maximize what we already have. I think that would be a really smart thing to do.
I appreciate that, and I think that that's basically what Dave is saying. He would bring back to us at the next meeting. Gerald, you're next.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, I forgot to take it down.
Okay. All right. So Dave, do you feel comfortable with the direction that has been discussed here at the board or at the table?
I do, and just one last thing to Director Anderson. Let's suppose this motion failed at next week's. There's nothing stopping an individual electoral area from funding something in their area. I think it's a better idea collectively if we have something, but it's not a lost cause if it doesn't. You can certainly come up with a motion and fund something for Area B.
And included in your thoughts for next meeting, I'd love to have some ideas around how to communicate what we have found here out to the public. I mean, I'm happy to put something out, and Jim has, I'm sure, and will. And but if there's any way to just take already what we have, it's really reaffirming to people's sense of the world.
Okay, all good comments. Thank you very much, directors, Sandy, staff, everybody, for your input into this conversation. Very, extremely important conversation. It's like the keystone of what's happening on our islands right now, and is probably the nub of where all of the anxiety and the dissent and everything else that's happening in communities, that's where it's coming from. Is, there's no place to live. People can't get jobs because they can't live here, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all related, and we need to get on with it. And I think that Dave's comments, we can do it as a group or we can do it individually. That's wonderful. Let's just give them the latitude to move forward on that. So
Mr. Chairman, you
can
have
you just
a motion to receive the report currently on the floor.
Okay, so on receipt, let's just do the receipt first of all. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. It's passed. And I would just ask Dave, do you feel comfortable with this as just direction to staff to come back to us next time with something?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, Staff's good. Directors, you good? Okay, we're all good. All right. So let's move on then. Thank you very much, Sandy, for your presence and, you know, speaking to this report. It was, you know, something that I was, you know, reluctant to get too far into when it first started, but after having conversations with your people and then seeing the work that has come out of it, I think it's very worthwhile and is extremely important to all of us. So thank you, and thank your entire um, uh, group of people, and hopefully we'll be working again together.
Yeah, thank you so much, directors. Happy to help, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we've moved on from housing needs report to number 5, Cortez Island Active Transportation Planning Project for receipt.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I believe Meredith will speak to this, Mr. Chair.
Thank you through the chair. So the SRD, of course, was awarded $20,000 in grant funding from UBCM for the Active Transportation Planning Program to complete this data and research gathering project. The study launched in January with a survey, a virtual engagement session with area stakeholders, an in-person workshop on Cortez Island, and a community lunch with the Klahoose First Nation. We received quite a lot of input from the community. And the areas of concern that were identified were not terribly surprising, certainly not to anyone from Cortez, I'm sure. But what we found, of course, is that one of the most significant barriers to active transport on the island is the lack of adequate on-road or roadside facilities. So whether that be wide enough shoulders for people to safely walk on, or the quality of the pavement, markings for sidewalks and that sort of thing, and as well as the terrain and weather. So a lot of kind of known barriers that were clarified for us through that community engagement. One thing I did want to point out is that one of the conclusions of the report acknowledged that the Siskin Forest Trail Network, with multiple trailheads combined with a relatively attractive terrain, made commuting by foot and bicycle around the southern part of Cortez Island a realistic travel alternative. However, that was kind of the only place where that was really possible. And we did see a lot of gaps, particularly between the sort of the core of Manson's Landing Village and the ferry terminal, and then the Klahoose First Nation Reserve out on the other side. And so those were some significant gaps that we would look to hopefully close with some connecting trail networks or some other works to try and make those routes more viable for walking and cycling. So this is presented to you today. The report is attached to the report, and it's provided to you for information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Meredith. Is there any comment? Noba? You're muted. You're muted, Noba.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, thanks for this, Meredith and team. Yeah, not one single surprise here, but good to see it collated in a professional kind of government speak way. So my question really, like the last one, is, well, where to from here? I see that on page 14, there's sort of a list of 6 things that we could do. They're mostly OCP related and sort of strategy and planning related, which we as a regional district aren't really great at taking leadership on a couple ferry rides away in our communities, and we're just always overtaxed, our staff, etc. So in terms of the most concrete thing that I really read throughout this, and that I've heard certainly on the island over the years and have worked in bits and pieces towards trying to figure out how to resolve, is indeed pathways. Pathways that's good for cycling, walking. And we had talked, Meredith, when you were here, about the viability of doing a real feasibility study for the Park Service to get into the development of more pathways and taking on the license of occupation from Ministry of Highways for some side of road designation, like's happened on Denman Hornby. So I would be curious, Meredith, to hear any recommendations you have about specific next steps that I might direct with Cortez specific funding to take a look at next year's budget cycle, actually doing a feasibility study about what it would cost to develop in an incremental way some of the pathways that were pointed towards in this report, but certainly known here well. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Nova. And if I may, so the next steps are kind of twofold. So first of all, now we need to take the information that we've received and go through and come up with like you say, what those next steps might be. The Active Transportation Planning Program is intended to partner with the Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program. And so now that we have done this initial step, that would be a next logical step. So we'll be looking to see if there are some, like you were mentioning, kind of those roadway right-of-way licenses or something like that. There may be some low-hanging fruit that we could pursue as part of that infrastructure grant application. And then we'll be looking for that as part of the budget process for next year's financial plan as well. And then obviously, as we've already talked about, those regulatory paths. So as we look at zoning bylaw review and OCP review on Cortez Island, that would be included within that as well. So those are kind of the two phases of next steps.
So do you need any board direction or direction from me toward that? Do you need a motion that says, staff bring back a further report outlining next step recommendations, or is that naturally going to happen?
If I may, I think at this point it would happen fairly naturally as part of our ongoing kind of budget processes, and it's already, the OCP review and the zoning review are already on. As far as the Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant would go, that would be something that we'll have to look and see what the intake period would be and come up with some suggestions for what we could do with that funding and bring that forward to EASC for consideration.
So you don't need any direction to look into those funding options at this time?
Not today, no, thank you.
Okay, you're muted, Nova.
Sorry, I need to speak to my daughter for a moment. Thank you.
Okay. I thought you were trying to speak to us, sorry. Life gets in the way, Okay, so that's is there any further comment from anybody else? Sorry, I forgot to ask. Okay, seeing none. That will be carried. Active transportation planning. On to item 6, which is going to have some crossover here. Arbutus Road Pathway Proposal.
Did we need to call the question on receipt for that last one?
I don't know, Tom, did we? I believe I did.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you actually just declared that it had passed without calling the vote.
Oh, sorry about that. I was reading your minds. All right. So on receipt, anyone opposed? Seeing none, it has passed. Prophetic of me, eh? Okay, so on to Arbutus Road Pathway Proposal number 6, report from staff. Dave, anything?
Move receipt.
Yeah, I think you have to vote on receipt, yeah.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay.
And Meredith.
Moved in
speaks
second.
this.
Okay, go ahead, Meredith.
Thank you. So the purpose of this request is from the Quadra Island Community Action Network, or ICANN, for the SRD to obtain a roadworks permit over the unopened road right-of-way along Arbutus Road to facilitate construction of a proposed multi-use pathway within the Arbutus Road right-of-way. The proposed pathway would provide a more efficient and safer active transportation route for community members from the Quadra Loop neighborhood to access amenities in Quathiaski Cove. And the ICANN has specifically asked that the SRD co-sponsor the project by obtaining a roadworks permit from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So today, staff is seeking direction to support this effort and trail development opportunity. If supported, a subsequent report outlining the financial implications would be provided for the committee's consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Meredith. And I do have some comments. If you'd like me to step down from the chair, I will. If not, I'll just say them quickly from the chair.
Say them
It's up to
quickly.
you, board.
You stay in the chair.
All right. So I meet with ICANN on a regular basis and have had some very long meetings with them by Zoom about this issue and others. And this one, I'm in total support of it. So, you know, just from the start, I want you to know that. But I don't understand the hoops that ICANN is needing to go through to acquire a simple right-of-way on a roadway. We just heard in the last report, and this is why I said there's crossovers, on the active transportation network on Cortez, you talked about, you know, access for, say, bus stops or whatever, and needing that permit from Ministry of Transportation. Well, we have been doing that for, God, as long as I've been director, where we just apply to highways if we need, say, a boat ramp, shore access, trail access, or whatever, that happens to be on a road right of way. We've applied to them for a, I forget what they call them, a special use permit or something like that. So I'm wondering, you know, from reading the entire report, why we have to go to the extent of calling it a park and have all of the extra regulations, et cetera. The work's going to be done by them. It seems like the only involvement by SRD would be to apply for the permit, first of all, and secondly, maybe highways part of that permit process would be to inspect it annually or semi-annually or something to make sure that everything is up to snuff for highway standards. And I don't see, you know, why there would be a big concern about that. And I certainly wouldn't want this to be a taxation issue for something as simple as, you know, getting a very, very cheap permit from highways. This is a very responsible group of volunteers doing community work, and they don't really need SRD involvement at every step of the way to any great degree, other than the, you know, the paperwork part. So I support it, and I want it to move forward as simply as possible. The volunteers have built this island, and I don't want them to see their taxes going up due to local government involvement where it isn't really needed. Our taxes were extremely high this year, and boy, have I heard about it. And when we get volunteers that are willing to help avoid that, we should do everything possible to encourage it. So I'm hoping that we can reduce this whole scope down to just the regional district in conjunction with ICANN and applying for a special use permit or whatever it's called over this road, existing road right away, to join the two areas. It's simple. It's really simple.
So,
So
Mr. Chair, if I can just interject there, you know, right in the first sentence, we were requested by ICANN to, this isn't something we're trying to impose or interject on it. ICANN asked us, and I suspect they asked us because highways is requiring the regional district to be on the permit. So if something does go wrong, I assume so highways can hold the regional district accountable for it. So that's all our involvement. Again, we're not trying to force our hand on anything, create more work for ourselves. We're doing this at the request of ICANN. And at the end of the day, when you say there doesn't want to be any taxation involvement by the SRD, we're happy with that. But if something goes wrong, I can assure you Highways is going to hold the regional district accountable.
Okay, and I appreciate those comments, Dave, and I think we're in heated agreement about this, that this did come from ICANN because Highways said you need the SRD to do it. And that's all I'm asking is for the SRD to just please do the minimum requirement from highways and move on from there. If it turns out that there's, some costs later that have to be attributed to Area C in some manner, fine, we'll do it. But I really don't see this as being any kind of a, long drawn out process. It should just be, in my mind, the SRD helping ICANN apply for it according to ministry request and just do it. And I did not mean to imply that the SRD was imposing anything on Area C or ICANN, that they were basically trying to help. But I'm just trying to ask that it be as simple as it possibly can be made so that we can just move on with it and these volunteers can get to work as soon as it stops raining, if it ever does. They can get in there and do the clearing that needs to be done on the surfacing, et cetera, et cetera. So, because I hate to discourage volunteerism on Quadra Island when it's available. As our population ages, there's fewer and fewer people that are able to get out there and swing a mattock. It's tough times. So, yeah, I'm all for it, and I have nothing else to say. Anybody else have a comment? Now that I've taken up so much time. Okay, having seen none on receipt, on the vote on receipt, anyone opposed?
And Mr. Chair,
Okay, no.
there's two options that staff will need one of them moved.
Okay, sorry. Can you just put them up on the board, Tom, please?
I'll move option 1.
Yeah, option one, but actually option one does imply, in my mind anyway, more involvement by the SRD other than just applying for the use permit.
Mr. Chair,
Am I correct, Dave?
You're no, but you're happy to move your own motion. Those are just options staff have provided.
Okay.
Would it be appropriate then for me instead to move, and I'm just testing this out with the director for the area and staff, that staff be directed to apply for a license of occupation from Modi on the, sorry, is it Arbutus?
Arbutus Road, yeah.
Arbutus Road, period. Could it be that simple?
Second.
As far as
I think that's more complicated. If the director wants minimum involvement, I mean, if we apply for license of occupation, does that mean that we are going to have ownership of it?
Yeah, that was my one comment. If I could, Dave, sorry to interrupt, but that would have been my one comment on the wording, license of occupation. I would have just said the appropriate permit.
I'm fine with that staff be directed to apply for the simplest appropriate permit for Arbutus Road from Modi.
Second.
Moved and seconded in discussion. Dave, do you have a problem with that?
No, it's all good.
Okay. I knew you'd say that. Okay, thank you. On the motion, any further discussion on it? I'm certainly in favor of it as the director for the area. So anyone else? Anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, it's carried. So Arbutus Road will be on the books. Okay, Gwathyaski Cove Sewerage System Operator Agreement, item number 7. Report from the CA.
Report.
Second.
Okay, and Dave, do you have anything to say?
I believe Wolfgang will speak to this.
Okay, Wolf, welcome, Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone, through the Chair and the CAO to the committee members. This is a report to consider the contract for operating and maintaining the Kwatiaski Cove sewer system. The last contract for operating and maintaining the system expired in March 2022. Since this date, the operator, Russell Avon, and staff from engineering services have been negotiating new contract terms while he continues maintaining and operating the system. Mr. Avon has managed the system since the year 2020, and he's got a great knowledge of all the different components and the different challenges that we have had. However, more time is needed to actually respond to a lot of the issues that we have with the different components. So we have been approached by the operator explaining, and we have gone through a lot of these issues that we have on site, and he has requested in his additional time and additional fees. The total cost that he's requested to be increased is $6,600 per year, which is $550 a month, to operate and maintain the system and to respond to a lot of the emergencies that we're getting, a lot of the blockages, and also to ensure that we comply with the environmental and the safety regulations. The wastewater treatment plant is nearing the end of its working life and requires more operator time. Given the experience and the local knowledge the current operator has with the system, staff feels it is in the regional district's best interest to maintain the consistency that we have with the current operator, in this case with Russell Avon. Replacement of the plant is estimated right now at $3.4 million. Regional district staff has been actively looking at grant opportunities. The latest, the one that we submitted for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Project in February, and we anticipate the results are announced spring 2023. So the recommendations to the committee members, the first one's to have the report received by the Chief Administrative Office, that the agreement with Russell Avon, the operator, get extended until December 2023. And the last recommendation, that the contract rate be adjusted from $23,400 to $30,000. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Okay, thank you, Wolf. And my first question would be, is Mr. Avon a resident of Quadra Island?
Sorry, could you please repeat your question again?
Is Mr. Avon a resident of Quadra Island?
Yes, that's correct. He does, and it's one of the big advantages of having him operating the plant.
Yes, I would have assumed that you would have taken care of that because, you know, stuff happens. I could have used a different word. 24 hours a day. It's not a very dependent thing. Okay, so I have no problem with the fact that he's requesting a raise. He's done excellent work, and I commend him for that. I was just wondering, how was in the negotiation, how was the amount arrived at? Like, what usually in a negotiation you come up with reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So I assume that that was all laid out in front of you, and you felt that the increase to 30,000 was reasonable.
I think, Mr. Chair, as Wolf explained, the additional times, the additional calls, and the additional maintenance that the operator is having to spend on the system, extend that through his hourly rate, and that's the difference.
Okay. Okay, well, on receipt, first of all, have we voted on the receipt? Tom?
Not yet, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anyone opposed to receipt? Okay, so then on the recommendations, I would need a motion to move the recommendations.
Move B.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? The only thing I'll say is I thank Mr. Avon for his dedication and work to a very problematic system that we definitely need to do some work on. So thank you very, very much, and I'm in favor of it. And if there's anyone opposed, see no opposition, we'll move on. So that's B, oh, okay, that includes the last line too, okay. All right, number 8, Cortez Island Refuge Collection Bylaw Amendment and Contract Update.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion on receipt, anything, staff?
Wolf can speak to this as well, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Thank you. Through the chair and the CAO to the committee members, this is a report to consider amending, excuse me, the Cortez Island Solid Waste Regulation and Rights by Law and the contract with the waste collection operator to reflect the objectives of the 2022-2026 financial plan. So the Cortez Island Solid Waste Regulation and Rates by Law was adopted in 1996, and it has been updated several times since then to increase the fees and charges for curbside collection. In 2021, the regional district signed an agreement with the operator BEM Contracting, and this is a contract to provide services to collect and transport the waste to the local transfer station. The contract specifies that the number of users, 557 on Cortez Island. But since then, we have been getting bills from the operator for 602, and the operator claims that there are additional 104 dwellings that may be eligible for the service. So upon review by staff, engineering staff, as well other people in our office, met with the operator. In addition, 90 dwellings have been identified as meeting the definition of a dwelling that is eligible for the service, bringing us to a total of 692 from 557. So a couple of recommendations that we have in order to rectify and in order to move forward with make things easier with the services. The first one is to have the Cortez Island Solid Waste Rates and Regulation by Law prepared for further consideration, as well to have the contract with BEM Contracting for curbside collection amended for the number of users and in order to meet the current service level. Any questions?
any questions, directors?
Yes, I have one.
Okay, go ahead, Nova. I don't see
Yeah,
your,
certainly.
where did you go?
Oh, I just turned my camera off, sorry. Kid running around in the background earlier. Certainly support this. My question is just around efficiency. Is there not a way of creating the bylaw such that it can be, the contract and the bylaw can be updated on an ongoing basis as the residences increase or decrease as determined by the operator and staff, rather than needing to come to the board for updating the contract and the bylaw all the time? It seems a bit cumbersome.
That's correct. We're
Okay, question of staff.
Mr. Chairman, I can advise, yes, we can certainly look at those options. I think that's the purpose of bringing back a further staff report with some considerations of those interests laid out for the committee to look at.
Yeah, I would be very happy to have a bylaw that amended that said, you know, on the concurrence of staff and a contractor, that number can be amended every year, and just delegate that.
Okay, so that, according to Tom, is already embedded in the current motions. So if you're happy with that, on receipt, I don't think I've called the question yet. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, on to item B.
I'd move B as presented, that a bylaw to amend the Cortez Island Solid Waste Rates and Regulation bylaw be prepared, and then amendments to the contract be prepared as well.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that passes. Okay, Quadra Island Rec Society, item number 9, proposed bike park. The report be received. CAO, any comment from staff?
Just need a motion to receive first and a second.
Receive.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so motion to receive.
Receive.
Moved and seconded
And
by somebody?
yeah, and Meredith will speak to this.
Okay,
Thank you through the chair. So this report is brought to you today by request to consider the implications to the SRD stemming from the Quadra Island Recreation Society's successful application to the Community Economic Recovery Infrastructure Program to construct a bike park at Blinken Park Memorial Park in Electoral Area C. So just as a reminder, this project was to build a mountain bike kind of trail through the park. So the full cost of the project is estimated as $210,000, with grant funding covering $180,000. So the remaining $30,000 in ineligible costs are expected to be provided through in-kind contributions of volunteer labor and donated materials. The project budget does include $35,000 in contingency funds, which represents about 16% of the total project budget. And QIRS would be responsible for any cost overruns. The SRD will retain ownership of the built bike park. However, the SRD is not the grant recipient, so we need to ensure that the province supports that arrangement. And the grant funding agreement also and the SRD procurement policies require that contracts related to the project be publicly tendered and awarded through a fair, transparent, and competitive process. Given the high value of the proposed contract, the SRD procurement policy would require that to be posted publicly on BC Bid as well as our website. And it would also require board approval before being awarded. Though that has not been done to date, it's not clear what process outside of posting the invitation to tender on the QIRS website was used to solicit the one quotation that they have received. And the grant funding has already been paid to QIRS. The insurance and liability to the SRD would be an extension of our existing insurance and liability, and so is expected to be nominal. The ongoing maintenance would be the responsibility of the SRD, funded through QIRS and their operating budget, though they have not provided an estimate for what that annual maintenance cost would be. Some other considerations are that area First Nations have not been consulted on the project. It's a condition of the grant funding agreement. However, QIRS has indicated that the province is not requiring it in this particular case. However, if supported, staff recommendation is that the proposal be referred to First Nations for comment before construction commences. The project budget does not include signage for the new trails, including trailhead markers and wayfinding, so that's anticipated as an additional cost to the SRD. And the SRD's land tenure agreement with the province requires us to retain written approval from the province prior to commencing any construction or trail clearing activities. Our tenure agreement is explicit in that this includes trail construction activity. So while staff maintains support for the project in principle, it does, however, continue to have reservations regarding the initial handling of the application by QRS, adherence to the funding agreement requirements, the lack of budget detail, and the procurement methods undertaken and the overall administration of the grant to date. It is noted that there remains a potential risk to the SRD should QIRS be in breach of the funding agreement or incur ineligible costs or cost overruns as part of the project. These outstanding issues can likely be resolved without hindering the project. However, it is clear that the SRD will need to ensure that all items are addressed prior to moving the project forward. Given the aforementioned, there may be value in the SRD requesting of the funder that the grant be transferred to the SRD to allow the SRD to act as the grant administrator and provide project oversight in partnership with QIRS. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Meredith. I do have some comments to make, and I think I will step down from the chair for this part.
Okay.
Brenda, if you'd like to step into
Right.
the chair.
Okay,
Um,
and I assume you're speaking first?
It's up to you.
Yep, I recognize you.
I would be. Okay, thank you. So first of all, I want to say I'm 100% in favor of this bike park. It's not a park and trails network. It's a bike park. It's a place where There will be constructed, jumps and, all the things that people do in bike parks. And it's being designed and engineered by professional bike park builder. So that's all being done. I've always been in support of the bike park. I've helped put in the first one, which this is basically just a maintenance or replacement, however you want to put it, of the original one, which is already there. So this isn't like, a brand new concept. I helped putting it forward to get it as one of the registered items that are provided by QIRS, and worked with the main people that were the volunteers building it and the kids that wanted what they wanted, like we did with the skate park. We got them to design what it is they want. And then it was engineered to meet those needs. So, this one definitely needs replacing. It's way out of date. The comments in the staff report, I do have some comment question about, there is an attached letter, I believe, to this report that came from Quadra Island Rec Society in response to the comments or conversation that they were having with the SRD staff regarding their questions, the staff's questions. So I believe that they have covered, after reading it numerous times and having had numerous conversations with board members and the coordinator for the hall, community center, I believe they've met everything. The comments that have been made about needing confirmation from the province about this and that, including First Nations involvement and design and all of those different things, they have been answered by the province. And they weren't answered necessarily in the regional district because the regional district didn't ask the questions, from what I'm being told. So, it's been a few months, and I would think that during that time, since we gave approval in principle, that the staff would have contacted the provincial government and talked to them personally if they weren't certain that the information they were getting from QIRS was accurate. So if that has taken place, great. If it hasn't, well, I think it should have. It's the use of the land is basically the same use of the land, and it's already in the contract with QIRS, and it's already insured. So I think those are covered. The grant funding agreement that's mentioned, the procurement policies. Well, I think, we had, what's happened here is a society has applied for money to build something on SRD property. So I think that, that conversation has taken place, but the procurement of who's going to do it, that has been put out by QIRS, not the SRD. True, but the QIRS is just as responsible in their understanding of being a society, that they have to do things correctly, and I think they did. The only thing that they have semi put out as far as a procurement is the designer engineer, and that's a very small part of it. The rest of this is going to be done by local contractors, by in-kind donation, by volunteers, like I've been talking about before in other comments throughout the meeting. The volunteer labor does the building of things on Quadra Island if possible. And if not, then we buy some from somebody else, hopefully from somebody on Quadra. The person that was procured, or not procured, but talked to about the design part of it is, I'm still going to consider him local as being an Nanaimo resident, still a Vancouver Island resident. So it's not like it's going to the Lower Mainland somewhere. So if any of these things need to be done to discuss with the province, is this okay to do it? I think that's on the shoulders of the regional district to make those phone calls, send those emails, whatever it takes. But QIRS has verified to the regional district that they've already got all of those approvals in place. And the reason they have them is because it was their grant. The grant was given to them. The other thing that is sort of, I think, an error on the staff on the part of staff, the staff report, is the transferring of this grant from QIRS to the SRD. The province has made it very clear in writing to the QIRS that they will not do that. They cannot do that. It was applied for by QIRS. They were awarded it. It cannot be transferred to another entity, whoever it is, SRD or anybody else. So that part of it, I think, is taken care of also. The First Nations part, the First Nations were consulted on the first bike park, and this would be an upgrade to the existing bike park, which they have been consulted on. So I don't really think we need to consult them again. I'm sure they would be 100% in support of it. So, I find this very difficult to deal with because it's caused some consternation between the regional district staff and the Quadra Island Rec Society and the director for the area and the community. And I don't like to see that. I like to see us all get along. And I think that the QIRS has done a really good job in putting this together and getting the grant and in administering everything that needed to be administered on their own. And they're doing it for the community who's doing it for the Strathcona Regional District. It's our facility. So, yes, a little differently than maybe the SRD would have done, but the result has come out the same. It's all been approved and it should proceed as far as I'm concerned, not just in principle, but the bike park should proceed as planned by QIRS, with them picking up costs where necessary, et cetera. And I believe that those will be absolutely minimal over time, and I don't think I have any problem with it as director. So that would be my comments on receipt. Sorry to be so lengthy, but it's important.
Okay, well, so any
Just
other speakers?
if I can, Madam Chair, there was a lot there, but the only way I can seem to characterize it is I don't know where the director gets most of that information because most of it's not accurate. Staff have received the correspondence from QIRS and stand with the comments that we have in the staff report. I don't know where the director gets the information that the province wouldn't transfer a grant to the property owner. That has never been communicated to us. The issues about cost, tendering, bidding still stand. Again, I don't know where the director gets this information from, but there's no recommendation by staff. If the director is willing to take the liability, incur the costs, then that's the direction of the committee.
If I may, Madam Chair,
Yes.
in response to our CAO, the information I am giving you is directly from Quadra Island Rec Society in the letter that you have in your hands, staff have in their hands. Maybe you haven't seen it, Dave, that the letter answers point by point every concern that was put forward by the regional district. And that's the information that I was also copied on, which it says right on the letter. And that's what I'm passing on in this, missive today, is the information that came from Quad Island Rec Society, which has been passed on to the regional district. So if you consider it incorrect, well, then I guess you have a conversation with the Quad Island Rec Society to happen and with the province to happen, but not with me. I'm passing on what I've been told. And I understand also from previous conversations on other issues that staff, being yourself, being the top staff, that the procurement policies, they're set by the regional district. We arbitrarily set numbers as to what each manager can go up to in their, giving out of an award or whatever. But you also have, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been my understanding for years that the CAO has the ability to exceed those amounts with the approval of the board. Is that not correct?
No, it's not correct, Mr. Chair. This amount of money that would have to go for board approval.
Well, I did say that the CAO could do it with board approval. So is that correct?
A CO can do almost anything with board approval. So my point is it has to go to the board.
Okay, well, that's fine. So I wasn't incorrect. And I would like us to move forward on this proposal to do the bike park. Once again, move it into supposedly the building season, which we're probably 2 months into. And the community and the kids would love to see it happen this year. So I'm hoping that we can make it happen this year. So I certainly am not taking on any responsibility as the area director or as whatever. This is a board project as far as I'm concerned.
Just for clarity, Mr. Chair, this is not a board project. So there's, I don't know where you get that. We didn't make the application. We didn't receive the award. This is not a board project. If you do not want to make a recommendation and the project goes ahead as is, then any liabilities, risks, whatever comes with it will be the responsibility of the board and the area director. So if you don't make a recommendation, that's fine with us. But you can't say you're not taking any responsibility. We are accepting responsibility by having this project constructed on our property.
Okay, well, that covers it then. If you're accepting the responsibility by having it on your property, then as far as the work goes and all that, that's being taken on by the Quad Island Rec Society and under their responsibility, and they are a contractor to the SRD. So I'm not sure what it is that is being said here, other than are we going to proceed or not? I suggest that we proceed, but we're on receipt still, right? So
just for clarity, we have nothing to proceed on. That if you allow the Rec Society to build the bike park on our property, then they will proceed with it. It doesn't have anything to do with the regional district.
Okay, I don't have the right to direct or allow anyone to do anything. So, I can't say that. All I'm saying is to the committee is, my wish would be that the board allow the Quad Rec Society to proceed with their project.
If I could just interject something, I think that when a nonprofit society takes responsibility for getting a grant application and for operating a bike park, you know, there's a transition over to regional district eventually in the operational side of things once it gets operating and whatnot. But we had the same experience with Hagel Park Society. Basically, Hagel Park was built by the community volunteers, and they had agreements with the regional district to supply them with operating funds for insurance and other things. And it just gradually became less volunteers and more regional district. And now the regional district has to contract people to do the work at the park. There's no volunteers. And I think it's preferable to have the community involved in the, although our contractor at Hagel is very good and very inexpensive. And so, you know, I think it's a transition we're talking about. I believe you should let the society proceed with their grant and build the bike park. And then when it comes to operating funds, make it an agreement with them to work with the regional district to operate that park. Like there's the construction and there's the operation. I think you should break it into those two categories and transition over later.
Just for
So
clarity, all operational funds come from the regional district.
Yes, and if I could, Madam Chair, once again, just in response to that, I think what you said is absolutely what is being asked for, that the society be allowed to do work that they have been granted money to do. And eventually, you know, well, as soon as it's built, it will be part of the SRD budgeting process, I guess, through the Quad Island Community Hall function, because they're the ones that do all of these things on that property. So if the regional district allows them to build it, then they build it. And if volunteer muscle runs out at some point and, you know, some other contractor needs to be brought in, well, that's one thing. But you have to realize that the society itself is a contractor. So, you know, they do all of the maintenance that happens on the park now, except for things like danger tree falling and that sort of thing. But they do all the rest of the maintenance. And that's done mostly by volunteer, or they budget for it. And it comes forward to us at the budgeting process at the end of the year. We see a line by line item as to what they're asking for to do for the next year. Line by line item. So if there were a need to do something to this park in the future, then it would come forward in that budget and it would either be approved or not approved. And if it wasn't approved, well, it obviously wouldn't get done.
So for
anyway,
for a resolution on this matter, are there any other directors that wanted to chip in? So are you going to bring forward a resolution to say that the regional district supports the QIRS proceeding with the $180,000 grant project to construct the bike park? And once constructed, the regional district will address their understanding of how they're going to, the protocols and how they're going to proceed from there? I think that would be a politic way to go.
Your resolution would be right on up to the point of where you added on the part about the regional district. If it just said, you know, under the current SRD contract with QIRS.
Okay,
That would cover everything. That'd cover the
So
insurance.
can you make that motion then? So we can,
We're still
pardon me?
on receipt, I believe.
Okay, I'll call the question on receipt. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, carried. Okay, so resolution?
Okay, well, that resolution would do fine.
Okay,
That the Quad Island Rec Society be allowed to, or,
that we support
I
them.
guess, that we support the,
Okay, can we get a clear
Quadra-
resolution from somebody and let Edith catch up on the typing? So can one of the directors please read it out?
Okay, it's Jim's area, so Jim makes it.
okay, that the committee recommend that the Quad Island Rec Society be allowed to proceed with the um, maintenance and replacement of the existing bike park at Blinken Park.
Madam Chair, this isn't maintenance and repair, it's construction of a bike park.
Well, it's in the exact same position, and
Just say reconstruction of the new bike park. Reconstruction of the bike park.
okay. Proceed with the reconstruction, using your words, of the existing bike park. I think that's accurate.
With their $180,000 grant.
Using the grant that they have received. It doesn't have to name the number.
Can I suggest a friendly, Jim?
No problem. Sure.
I don't know that
Go
we're in a
ahead.
position to allow or disallow. I might suggest instead that the wording be that the board support the QIRS to proceed with.
Mhm.
Okay, I agree with that. That the
I do.
committee recommend that QIRS be, or support. That's
And then
right.
take out be allowed. Take out be allowed. Support QRS to proceed with the reconstruction of the existing bike park using the grant funds they received.
Yes, that would be worded better.
And then leave it at that and then see what transpires with an agreement after. Well, they're under the Blinken Park agreement, so things will go back to normal after it's constructed.
That's what should happen.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
was that, I'm sorry, I didn't catch whether Director Nova Anderson seconded that?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Director Anderson. So moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, carried.
Okay, thank you very much, board, staff, everybody. Okay, are you passing the chair back to me? Or?
Yes, you've got it.
Okay, for the final and most important one on the whole agenda, number 10, requests for financial assistance for Sayward Future Society, Gerald, you're on. Motion to receive, first of all.
Move receipt.
Seconder,
Second.
any discussion? Anything from staff?
Nothing from staff.
Anything? Okay, thank you. Anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, move on to item B.
I'll move B.
Okay,
I can't see it at the moment.
Second,
You recommend the grant,
$500.
$500.
That's the one.
Okay, moved. And who was the seconder?
Lee,
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Or sorry, anyone opposed? That carries. Okay, and I believe that's the end of it. Okay, so motion to terminate. We are terminated.
Second, see you in an hour.
Mhm.
See you in an hour for our next fun meeting.
Yeah. Okay, see you in a
And
bit.
Brenda, before you
Yeah.
go, we are